This weekend we are celebrating the women's marathon movement, and celebration is the proper word. Just look around you here. Those of you in the audience, see how many women there are in this group? It's not just skewed because it's a women's panel, but this is what has happened in running in the last generation or so. All the women runners, please stand up. And we aren't just celebrating the four up here, but all of you, because in many senses, you're here because these folks were here before you. And I'm here, I guess as a token male on the stage, but I can say, because I'm old enough now, that I have seen the entire history of women's marathoning. And often I feel like Forrest Gump because I've been like on the periphery of many of the important events in women's marathon history, including seeing some of the greatest performances of these folks up here. So here's what we're going to do today. I am going to very briefly introduce the four, and then I'm going to talk to each of them separately. But what these four represent is running from the 1960s through the 1990s in their heyday, to all of them continuing to contribute in their own ways to running today. We have here four Boston Marathon Championships. We have 5 Olympics, 4 of them by one person, and 1 by another, which is quite notable. We have 3 world records, and 1 very near miss, which we'll talk about in a bit. And we've had 3 of the 4 have written books. The other should have a book written about her or by her, and we'll talk about that. We have many halls of fame, and we're going to talk about some of that as well. But the 4 people here on the panel, starting, should I say oldest first? The longest time runner first. Nina Cusick is right there. Give a wave, Nina. Nina represented probably an earlier, or the first generation of women marathoners. She was older when she started. She did not have a high school or college running background because there was no possibility of having that in her era. She started running in her late 20s. She had children at the time she started running. She was a working mom, and in 1969 ran her first Boston Marathon. In 1972, well, let me give you a little quick background. 1970 at the AAU National Convention, AAU was the governing body of running in the United States. A high official on the women's track and field committee said that women's long distance running was not worth bothering with because it was just a lark indulged in by bored housewives. Well, 2 years later, the Boston Marathon finally saw the light, and Nina Cusick was the first winner of the Boston Marathon for women, officially. And the second winner of the Boston Marathon for women the following year was Jacqueline Hansen. She will be going back to Boston next month to celebrate the 40th anniversary of that feat. And Jacqueline was the first woman to break 2:45 in the marathon, the first woman to break 2:40 in the marathon, and was instrumental, probably even more so than anybody else on this stage, in winning the spot for the women's, the rightful place for women in the marathon and the Olympic Games. And one beneficiary of that, prime beneficiary of that, was the first women's Olympic trials winner from the US and the first women's gold medalist at the Olympic Games, Joan Benoit Samuelson. That was in 1984. In that race was a runner from New Zealand who I think typified the new breed of women marathoners, those who came from a very strong track background. Lorraine Muller was an international competitor as a teenager in the 800 meters and graduated all the way to the marathon, ran the first women's marathon in 1984, ran the second women's marathon in the Olympics in 1988, ran the third Olympics for women in 1992, and at the age of 37, won the bronze medal at Barcelona. But she wasn't finished there. She ran the fourth Olympic marathon in Atlanta, 1996, and possibly, I think you were aiming for the 2000 Olympic team also. But there was a matter of a child on the way by that time, who Lorraine, in a previous talk I heard her give, said her daughter Jasmine was her gold medal. So I'm going, rather than ask questions all the way down the line, and then ask a second question all the way down the line, what I'd like to do is to chat with each of these runners from different eras of the marathon, starting with the longest ago, working up to the most recent. Talk a few minutes here, and then we'll have some time at the end for either discussions among themselves. It doesn't work so well today for having questions from the audience because this is being filmed. The back of your heads right now is being filmed. And it's hard to hear the questions from the audience, but we're going to allow time at the end of the program for you to come up here and talk with these folks individually and have something signed, if you want to have your bib number signed, for instance, or if you happen to bring a book along, you could do that as well. We may have to kick you out before the 1:30 program, but we'll move all the speakers outside too, so they won't leave you unsatisfied as far as getting some answers. But Nina Cusick, Nina, you're on the spot first. Nina, you started running in the 60s when there weren't a lot of women running. What was your impetus, since you didn't have a big background in running? What was it that triggered the thought in your mind that you could become a runner?
Well, I was an athlete anyway. I had in 1960 I was a New York State champion in bike racing, speed skating on roller skates and on ice. And then I started to have children, and Bill Bowerman in 1967 came out with a book called Jogging, and it cost $1. And and when I opened the book and saw the pages of these women running in their raincoats and those little wax things that you put over your heads, and they looked like they were in their 40s, and I thought, if they can do it, I can do it. And I had been running anyway. We called it dry training for speed skating on ice. But I started to run. He said if a high schooler could do a 7-minute mile, she was worth training. So I went out and I did a 7:05 mile, but I was pregnant. And so after 3 months, I stopped. And then when I had my third child, I started running again. And there was me and my husband and 2 other guys from our speed skating, and we got our first long distance log, 1968, and it showed Elaine Peterson standing on the sidelines to jump into the 1968 Boston Marathon. So I had never heard of Catherine Switzer. I just knew that women weren't allowed in the Boston Marathon, but officially, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter to me at all. And we trained and we went and we ran 1969 Boston Marathon, and from there we met the New Yorkers and we found out about the New York Roadrunners and just started getting involved and increasing my mileage and bettering my times, and then I thought, why can't we be official? So I started to learn about the AAU, which was the national body for running, and I went to their convention with some resolutions in there, and they did finally, in 1971, they did approve that certain women could run the marathon. But they had to start 10 minutes before or after the men, or from a different starting line. And we felt, I mean, maybe that makes sense now, so many women, it's better to start, maybe separate, but we felt that was more discrimination. So we painted, in Boston, we painted a starting line for ourselves on the sidewalk, and then we just went wherever we wanted. And then in New York, I don't know if you ever heard about it, our sit-down strike. We had a 10-minute sit-down strike, 10 minutes added to our time, and there was just so much publicity about that comes the 1972 AAU convention, and everything changed. And from then on, it was moving ahead to getting us into the Olympics.
Before I ask about your involvement in the effort to win women's spot in the Olympics, I want to ask you about a race in 1971. At that time, no woman had broken 3 hours in the marathon. And you ran a race in New York, which welcomed women, and you were running against Beth Bonner. Can you tell us about that race?
Back then there was so much room for you to run. It was wonderful. And I think Beth was ahead of me from about the 9th mile on. I think she was ahead of me. Sometimes I saw her. And she had a nice little stride, good rhythm. And I got a little closer to her up the last big hill in Central Park, 650 steps up. And I think she beat me by 24 seconds. We both broke 3 hours for the first time. So it was a celebration for both of us.
So that's why I mentioned earlier that we almost had the first runner under 3 hours in the marathon, but we do have the second person ever to break. And she only was a minute away, less than a minute away from being the first woman under 3. Unfortunately, Beth Bonner was passed away several years later in a bike car accident, and she was a true pioneer, but obviously Nina was too. I recall also, Nina, that this is another one of the events that I happened to be on the periphery of, was the first national championship marathon for women. And this was held here in California in San Mateo, 1974. It took the AAU a while to get around to having a national championship, but Nina admittedly wasn't in her top form then, but she felt she owed it to the movement to come out and run that race in California. And that was another big step forward, but it's often said that it's what we do after we thought we'd done everything that's most important, and I think a lot of your contributions have been away from the running itself and in the legislative and lobbying end of things. So you were heavily, you were involved at the AAU, you were involved with the Athletics Congress, and you're still involved with the USA Track and Field. In what capacity have you worked?
Well, I'm on the Women's Long Distance Running Committee, and on the Law and Legislation Committee, and on the Rules Committee. And so I can submit, for rule changes and anything that we think is not productive and ancient, and anything that would help our organization to grow more. And of course, well, I put in the legislation for us to have national championships back then, and what that worked.
There was an organization that I was involved with, Jacqueline was heavily involved with, and you were as well, called the International Runners Committee. Didn't get nearly as much publicity as some other efforts that were being made at the same time, but I can publicly thank you now for your efforts on the part of women marathoners in that regard.
Thank you.
So Nina, it's wonderful to have you out from New York. I think this is the first time you've been to Napa. And it's the first time that we're both, unfortunately, showing her age a little bit, but I told Nina, I think it's been 35 years since I've seen you, so she hasn't aged a bit, I have. Nina, thank you.
Thank you.
Jacqueline Hansen and I have been talking how many times a day this year?
3 times daily.
She's the opposite of Nina. I haven't even talked to Nina in the meantime. We're talking now because Jacqueline is at work on a book called A Long Time Coming, which is a very fitting title because it's discussing how long it took for women to have a spot in the Olympics and other international events as well, world championships, and so on. It's a personal history because she has lived it and in many senses was born a little bit too soon. Because Jacqueline's best days came at a time when the women didn't have that opportunity. But Jacqueline, you started as a track runner, track and cross country, with a famous coach. Tell us about that coach and tell us about his encouragement or discouragement as far as you becoming a marathon runner.
Thank you, Joe. Yes, it has been a long time coming personally and on the world level for running. But I got my start, well, I should first, can I back up a little bit and say that I got my first start with a high school coach. And but when I was in high school, we only ran up to 400 meters. I was pretty bad at other sports, and so I only went out for track because the team didn't have to choose you. As you can imagine, I don't know if you saw me standing, but I'm not basketball material. So that woman, Dixie Griffin, opened a door for me, and that otherwise my life would be different today. But she didn't take me to the city meet, for example, because she knew I was no sprinter. I discovered in college, where I didn't really have women track coaches or teams, I had, a small team in one college, and then I was a one-woman team in another college. But I discovered a man named Laszlo Tabori. He was a Hungarian Olympian. He was the third man in the world to break the 4-minute mile after Bannister. And he trained us as middle distance runners, not men or women runners. And he grouped us by ability. And he took everyone. He considered himself back in the day an underdog, so he was not opposed to taking underdogs like me. I didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't know of his reputation, or I might have been too intimidated to ever show up. But then he was so intimidating, I was afraid not to come back the next night, even though the first workout was more than I'd ever run at once in my life, and it was just the warm-up. In fact, I really thought we were done, and we were walking to our bags, and one of my teammates from college who had introduced me to him, I said, "So John, we're done, right?" And he goes, "No, we're going to get our spikes on now and begin the workout. That was just the warm-up." So I was really a greenhorn. But, I think I thrived under his disciplinarian coaching style. I do not coach the way I was coached. I think it's survival of the fittest. But I think that for me it was adaptation. And I think in part only being allowed to run 400 meters, which increased to my junior college at 800 meters, which increased to my 4-year college as 1 mile. And I'd already discovered Laszlo by that point, and so I was the national collegiate champion in the 1 mile in the same year that I was the Boston Marathon champion. So I had a range. But this man I know all he ever really wanted was another sub 4-minute miler like him, and all he ever got was a lot of strong women. But because he coached us equitably, and so I have him to thank, and he has been my coach for life. We are still friends. I still see him on a weekly basis.
You had a teammate named Cheryl Bridges, and tell us how she inspired you, and tell us, maybe you can even tell us at the end of it, who Cheryl Bridges is related to now.
Okay, I'll save that part for the end.
Yeah.
Big surprise. Laszlo and I ran, well, he coached, I ran for the LA Track Club, now Laszlo's coach was Igloy, Mihaly Igloy, who was kind of termed the grandfather of interval training. So my workouts were all intervals all the time. And I was a middle distance runner, so I'm running 800, 1500, and occasionally a 2-mile or 3,000 meters, and cross country. And one of my teammates in the LA Track Club did not train with me, but she lived up in San Luis Obispo, and I believe her husband trained her, Larry Bridges. We had just finished our cross country season, And for whatever reason, you know, she was coming down to run the Culver City Marathon. The official title was Western Hemisphere Marathon, second oldest consecutive run marathon at the time to Boston. And it was a big deal marathon, but I believe that at the crossroads where Boston went professional, Culver City did not, and it died on the vine. That no longer exists. Cheryl came down to run that marathon, and I thought anybody crazy enough to run 26 miles deserves a cheerleader, so my teammates and I went out to cheer her on, and Laszlo was there because he lived on the course, and so he always watched this race, and it was the first marathon I'd ever seen. I thought, you know, so I'm watching Cheryl become the first woman in the world to break 250. She ran 249 and became the first woman. And I looked at her and I thought, a little bit precocious, but it was kind of, I can do that. I can beat her in the 2 miles sometimes on the track. Sometimes I can beat her in cross country. If she can do that, maybe I could do that. So I was hooked. Right then and there, I made a vow that the next year I wanted to do that. That looked like fun. It also wasn't about, you know, speed workouts. It just looked like fun. It was something different that I'd never done before. Laszlo didn't even let us run on the roads, not even on our off days, our easy days. We always ran on the track and or a grass park. Our feet never touched cement. And even on the track, we ran on the grass on the inside of the track, and only for the time trials did we step onto the dirt of the track. So it was always grass, and then maybe dirt, never cement. Which is why I think I was injury-free until I became a marathoner. I vowed to run that marathon the next year, except I kind of forgot about that. The only training I did for it, and it really wasn't training for it, was the next summer when I had a couple of weeks off, and I thought Laszlo wasn't looking. I went on 2 road runs, one with the guys who ran on the roads, and because they always looked like they were having fun telling stories, drinking beer afterwards. So I joined him on a 10-miler once and a 14-miler once in the summer, and then went back to cross-country training, and the marathon was in December, so those runs really didn't affect that. But I had to ask permission, and I asked Laszlo, figuring I'd get yelled at, if it was okay. I said, you know, I just had the best cross-country season ever. I finished 8th in the nationals. I want to run this marathon in 2 weeks, and like Cheryl did last year. And you know, I thought he didn't say no. He said, you know, he got a little philosophical. There's some things we have to find out for ourselves. And you're the most stubborn runner I've ever known, and I think you'll go far. And I thought, does he mean about 18 miles and drop out? Or does he mean I see a future in distance running for you? He won't tell me now. Every time I ask him, he laughs. So I showed up 2 weeks later with that kind of training, and for 20 miles, I swear, you know, zipping off the 7-minute miles like it was nothing, and then it was a whole nother race. And the Culver City course is very cruel. It brings you by the finish line at 20 and sends you out again. Bad planning. I so was tempted to drop out, but I finished. You know, my friends had to get off their bicycles because they couldn't pedal that slow. You were allowed to have bicycles. And I somehow crawled in, but because Cheryl didn't show up that day, I won. So I crossed the finish line, and my first words are "never again." But then they put that medal around you, and it's like, well, next year, next time. And then I had to go home to a family gathering. It was like my birthday, you know, a couple of cousins, an uncle, you know, whole thing. Including Thanksgiving, we were celebrating at my house. And I told a little white lie about where I was that day because they didn't exactly approve of my running. So I left a note on the dining room table. You know, Judy and I went out for a run. I think we're going to shopping and maybe a movie, and I'll be late. But I had to go to an awards ceremony, and so I was really late. And I walked in the door, and I thought, I am going to catch hell. And instead, they stood up and applauded because they had seen it on TV and the news, and my aunt lived on the course and saw the whole thing. And now they were my biggest fans. And so Cheryl, thank you to Nina for, you know, opening the Boston door for me, but thank you to Cheryl for opening any marathon door for me. And Cheryl Bridges, her maiden, well, there's a plaque at the Culver City Start. and they have Patricia Bridges, so I guess she even changed her first name once. But she changed her last name 3 times. I don't even remember the maiden name, but Bridges was the first husband. Steve Flanagan was the second husband. You know what's coming. And now she's Treeworgy, so Shalane Flanagan is her daughter.
So it's kind of hard to skip over a world record in a couple of seconds, but you broke the world record in Eugene, but I'm editing her book, so I got the preview of it. The most dramatic part of your book is not your world record, it's what happened for you in 1984, Boston. So you can introduce the International Runners Committee, the approval of the women's marathon, and then your attempt to run in the first Olympic trials.
Okay. Yeah, that is the most dramatic moment of my entire running career, was qualifying for those Olympic trials. But to back up a little bit, yeah, I did set the world record at Culver City in '74 after going to Waldnil with Nina for the first women's international marathon in Germany. Came back with all the confidence in the world to run Culver again, and first world record, then the next year, the second world record, the more important one, first sub 240. And that was a peak performance. So I thought it was the most dramatic race at the time because it was effortless. It was everything coming together at the right time, negative splits. It was heaven, paradise. Wish I could bottle that and pull it out of my repertoire anytime. But some races feel better than others. Joe and Nina and I were on a committee called International Runners Committee with 13 members. So 3 of us are here today, and I'll probably leave somebody out if I try to name them, but it included people like Joan Elliott, Eleonora Mendonça, wow, I will forget, but you have to read the book. There were a lot. We were a worldwide lobbying group for getting the 5,000, 10,000, and marathon into the Olympic Games. Now, I had just set 2 world records in the marathon with no Olympics to go to. Unlike when I was a 1,500-meter runner and I knew I could go to our Olympic trials and move on, I bumped up against this, we called it a glass ceiling, and had nowhere to go with it. And I was naive enough to think in '74 that letter writing campaign, petition, signatures, call Nina. Well, she'll be East Coast, I'll be West Coast. We'll get this done. We'll get this taken care of. And that didn't really, it took a lot more than that. I just did not know it was going to take 10 years of lobbying and that it would culminate in a lawsuit against the IOC, the IAAF, the USOC, the AAU, TAC, USATF. They became 3 different entities governing our federation here in this country. And then even the LA Organizing Committee, where the Olympics were going in '84, and at least we have strong anti-discrimination laws in the state of California, and so we stood a best chance of suing here as opposed to Moscow the time before or Seoul, Korea the time after. And even the poor little Memorial Coliseum Commission was in the lawsuit. We had to cover all our bases. The ACLU represented us, Nike funded us, and the marathon was lobbied in successfully, and I won't go into all the details, but the orphaned events were the 5,000 and 10,000 because they told me to my face, the president of our international federation told me to our face they were of no value, they were boring events, they wouldn't sell tickets to the game, and they were never going in. So we know the marathon was popular, and it probably represented TV rights and all that. So we're getting down to it. The marathon has been lobbied in, and the most important thing I could ever do in my life to that point is to qualify for those Olympic trials. I had to be there. I unfortunately had a little condition called compartment syndrome in my left hamstring. In November of 1983, I had surgery. We finally got it diagnosed, and I had surgery. Now, I had to get my qualifying time in by mid-April of '84. And the trials were going to be in May of '84, so it's a tight window. And I had surgery in November. So it was lucky surgery, didn't cut the muscle, just cut the sheath around the muscle. And I walked out of the hospital, and as soon as the stitches were out, I was running again. And I ran my first attempt in January. and it cramped. I slowed down. I missed. But I did no damage, so the doctor and my coach said I could run again. So I tried in February, and I thought my training partner was speeding up, but no, I was slowing down, so I missed by a minute or two. So then I said, okay, guys, there's one more shot, April, Boston, last chance. Now, no, my coach and my doctor both said we'd never let anybody run 3 marathons in 3 months, but you have to, you have nothing to lose to try. So Boston is it. I get there. Lorraine Muller and I were there before the race, looking at this cold wind with hail and trying to figure out how many clothes we could wear and still race. And we were all sharing clothes. And Lorraine had a great day that day, but I'll let her tell her story. I was okay. I was on pace to mile 25, and I was listening to Dick Beardsley's story, and I think I had the same kind of race as he did, only I was fighting myself and a time, and not Bill Rogers. And I got to mile 25, and I thought, wow, yeah, here we go. They had a clock up there that said your projected finish time will be 2:44. Your place right now is 10th. And I thought, how did they do that? And that was the last thing I remember. I don't remember the blue and gold line that said 25.2, like he talked about, and I know it had to be there. But by then, I had tunnel vision, and I was fighting falling face first on the sidewalk, trying to keep myself upright. So I guess I was blacking out. I'd just never done that before, and I didn't know. But I got really mad at myself, and I just chanted in my head, first really angry, and then just kind of a mantra. I deserve to finish this race. I have 1 mile to go. I didn't work 10 years for nothing, and I didn't go to all that trouble to qualify in that year, and I had to finish. It was just the most important thing in my entire life. I had to finish. And so I hesitate to tell that story to my athletes. Like, I want to tell them mind over matter, you deserve to finish, but I don't want them to black out, and do harm. So, but for me, it didn't matter. It didn't matter. And Laszlo had always told me, you won't die in a race. You'll black out first. Well, I called him and I said, you're right. You're right.
How did you
So
find out?
I wake up in a hospital cot with an IV bottle and dog tags around my neck and a wool blanket and no clothes. My watch is still running. And the doctor said, young lady, your body temperature is below 93 and we are keeping you here for observation. Kind of like, where's your next of kin? And he was scaring me. And where is your bag with dry clothing? And I looked at him and I said, did I finish? And what was my time? And then the next thing I said, well, he said to the nurse, well, she may be dying here, kind of joking, but she wants to know her time. And she said, I'll go find out. And then we got onto the clothes thing, and I said, well, I had no plans of coming down here. I was going to cross the finish line and jog back to my hotel, so no, I don't have any dry clothes here. So they let me wear the wool blanket home. But she came back and with a time of high 2:47, so let's round up to 2:48, in 14th place. So you know what that means? That last mile I gained 4 minutes and lost 4 places. And I must have looked like I was running in place. I must have looked bad. And as a matter of fact, there were 2 television crews following me around all day long because our lawsuit was in court that day for the first time in Los Angeles, and I couldn't be there because this was more important. I knew my lawyers could take care of court, and I had to be here. And they were falling all over themselves trying to get a picture of the actual fall at the finish. But they didn't. I was really glad. But my husband said I looked like a drowned rat on Nightline that night. And so I call home and I say, book those tickets for Olympia, we're going. And I get a call back from Julie Card at the LA Times. We lost in court that day. And I went from the highest high to the lowest low in moments. And so that is why it's the most dramatic day of my entire running career. I went to Olympia.
Yeah.
That's all that mattered.
Well, the Olympia was your Olympics.
Yeah.
And you went there to celebrate. There's lots of reasons to celebrate, and that brings us to Joan. Joan, you had a similar story involving surgery, but your timetable was even tighter. Tell us about, I think most of the people have heard it, but not in your own words, about your own surgery before the trials and your own concerns about getting to the trials of '84.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the women up here on the panel, because if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be here, and especially Nina and Jacqueline. So, and Lorraine, you kept me honest throughout my career. But their stories still send goosebumps up my spine, because I was really the beneficiary of their labors and love and passion for our sport. So I just love to run, and Jacqueline made mention of her workouts and survival of the fittest. Well, I grew up with 3 brothers, so I had my own survival to deal with at home. And I would either run to them for help, or I would run away from them because I had taunted them in some manner. And so that's really where my running began. And also my dad, he's 92, was a member of the 10th Mountain Division. So he served in World War II in the Italian Alps along with Bill Bowerman, the founder of Nike, and who Nina also made mention of with his first book, Jogging. So I feel like we're all related, if not through sport, through our stories. And I remember my first major national running meet. Well, I guess I did run in the AAU cross-country nationals in Raleigh, North Carolina. My parents bought me a ticket thinking it was a once-in-a-life opportunity to compete at the national level. And so that was when I was a junior in high school, which would have made it 1974, or 3, the fall of 73, I guess. And then I had a chance to participate in the AAU Junior Olympics, Junior Nationals at UCLA. I remember my father driving me to the airport and saying, I'd qualified in the 1,500 meters. I don't understand why you would travel over 3,000 miles, because we live in Maine, to run less than a mile. And I said to my dad, well, it's the longest distance available, number one, and number two, you won't understand running until you start running yourself. So at about 50-something, he started to run and ran well into his 80s and would still be running now at 92, but he has a bad case of plantar fascia, so he walks 2 or 3 miles every day. So he had us skiing as soon as we were walking. And I had aspirations in the sport of skiing. I had Olympic aspirations in that sport, and then I broke my leg my sophomore year and started to run as a form of rehab, and the rest is history. But anyway, that relates to Joe's question, because I was just in China and Hong Kong. I ran a half marathon in Hong Kong on Sunday, and then flew back to Oregon. And our daughter is here to run, and she lives up there now, so rather than going all the way back to Maine, I stopped in there and caught up with some friends, one of whom runs the Nordic Center at Mount Bachelor. She used to run the Nordic Center where we ski in Maine. And she said, well, I'm bringing a mystery guest along with me, and it was Dan Simoneau, who was a Nordic Olympian from Maine, who now runs the Junior Olympic program out at Bachelor. And he was given a place to stay when he first moved to Oregon by Dr. Stan James. And Dr. James is the surgeon who did my arthroscopy knee surgery 17 days before the Olympic trials in Eugene. I had been training in Maine and was finishing up a long run and going up one of the last big hills on that course. I felt something basically unravel on the lateral side of my knee and thought, uh-oh, this isn't good. I've never felt this sensation before. And by the time I got home and out of the shower, my knee was locked up. And so this is St. Patrick's Day, 1984. It all happened on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th. And I knew I was in trouble, so I called Dr. Bob Leach who was the team physician at Boston University, where I had been coaching but had taken a leave to train for the Olympics. And he had me come right down to Boston, which is about a two-hour drive from where I was living, and said, well, I'm going to give you an injection of cortisone. And I had never had anything like that, and I was very nervous about it, but he was a very paternalistic figure in my life, and I trusted him. So I had the injection and had a few days and of good training, and then it tightened up again. And he said, well, I can give you one more injection, but if this doesn't work, you're in trouble. I don't know what else I can do. So it didn't help, and I was running for Athletics West at the time, which was a Nike-subsidized team in Eugene, but I had asked if I could stay in Maine to train because I believe you have to be totally comfortable in the environment in which you train or work in order to have success. So I knew Athletics West had a great massage therapist by the name of Rich Fay, and Dole Corporation was the sponsor of the first Women's Olympic Trials. And they had a corporate retreat down in Tucson and asked me to be part of it. And so I flew from Maine to Tucson, and there was a fun run, and I jogged through that. I could barely move. And then as soon as I finished my obligations there, I flew up to Eugene to have Rich work on me. And, you know, he worked on me, you know, a couple times a day for 2 or 3 days, and then threw up his arms and said, the only thing I can suggest is Joni see Stan James. So I went to see Stan James, and he gave me a prescription for butazolidine, and I'm not one to take meds. And again, I trusted Stan. You know, he'd worked with a lot of the great athletes at Athletics West, but I was so frustrated because I knew I was running out of time. It was now April 26th, and the trials were on May 12th, so it was actually less than 17 days. I think it was more like 14 or 15. But finally, halfway through the course, 3 days later, I said to Bob Seveny, who was advising me and coaching me at the time, I'm running out of time. We need to do something. So he called Stan and said, so Stan agreed to do the surgery, but he did the surgery thinking that there was no way I was going to get to the marathon starting line, but the 3,000-meter trials, which was also a new event, were being held a month later in Eugene. So if we can't get her ready for the marathon, maybe she can get ready for the 3,000, and I'm thinking marathon, because I wasn't a very good track runner. And I also said to Stan, before he put me out, if you get in there and I have a major problem going on, fix it. Don't wake me up to tell me, you know, there's no way you're going to compete in the marathon trials or the 3,000 meter trials because you have a torn ACL or whatever. And so I just said, fix it. And it was ambulatory day surgery, and I woke up and I was in a hospital room covered in gauze and ACE from hip to foot, and I just kind of said, okay, it's not going to happen. He found more than we'd bargained for. And he walks into the room about 3 minutes later and said, are you surprised to be here? And I said, yes. And I said, I guess it's not going to happen. And he said, well, don't come to that conclusion so quickly. He said, your reputation preceded you, and I knew if I let you out, you'd go test it immediately. So you're going to stay in here for 24 hours, and you're not moving an inch, and you're going to keep that iced and elevated. So I did, and then when I was discharged, I was good for a day, and I did some walking around on it, but I did keep it elevated and iced when I wasn't running. And so I went out and tried it, and I really didn't trust it, but it felt weird. And then I went to the Twilight meet that Saturday night, and I remember barely being able to climb up into the bleachers to watch the meet. Because what had happened was I was favoring the knee, and I pulled the opposing hamstring, and that was what almost ultimately kept me out of the trials. And so I was working with a PT who recommended I meet with this person who had this new electromagnetic therapy by the name of Jack Scott. And I don't know if that name rings a bell with anyone, but Jack Scott was Patty Hearst's accomplice. And I didn't know if I trusted this guy or not. But anyway, he seemed like he had a new mission in life and was willing to help me, and the PT knew him and trusted him. And so Jack worked on me morning, noon, and night. And somehow I was able to get to Olympia and, ran that race on a prayer, because on paper there's no way I should have been on that starting line. But I got there, and I also did a run. I did a 17-mile run, I think, 2 days before I went to Olympia. And I didn't get to Olympia until the 11th hour. But Lisa Martin from Australia had gone to the University of Oregon and was training in Eugene, and she was on the Australian Olympic team. And she said that she would join me for that 17-mile run. And I said, if I can cover 17 miles on Prius Trail, then I will go to Olympia. If not, I'm not going. Meanwhile, my husband, Scott, who was my fiancé at the time, and a brother from Maine and a brother from Alaska had already made their ticket reservations or were going. And I remember calling them saying, don't waste your money. It's not going to happen. And even if I get to Olympia, there's no way I'm going to make the team. And they said, we're coming. We're coming. And so I guess I knew then that if they were putting that much faith in me to get there and to run, then I better show up and run. And everybody at the starting line was very supportive, and a lot of my competitors were saying, why are they putting you through this? Your time is so much faster than everybody else's. You should get an automatic bye, but our system is what our system is, and for good reason. And if I had received that bye and hadn't made the team, I wouldn't be able to live with myself. So I had to show up and prove myself. And I still can't explain how I did it, but I did it. And
Well, I was there that day, and it seemed to me the obvious show of emotion was even greater than it was at the Olympics. So maybe it was relief. I'm not sure. At the finish line, when you came through the finish, you were definitely. You'd gone to the limit, and also you were just like, whew,
yeah.
I survived that
was
one.
huge relief.
Yeah.
And I remember my husband had made those multicolored beanie caps with the propellers. Well, he had doctored one up with the Olympic rings, which matched the colors, and he got in a little trouble for that. But I still have parts of that beanie somewhere. I don't have the white hat that I ran with during the Olympic marathon. It was a painter's cap, and it was a Nike Westwood painter's cap, and I had to put athletic tape over the advertising because Nike wasn't the sponsor that year of the team uniforms. And I had to go through drug testing, and then I had to go through the press conference, and by the time I got to a sorority house that Nike had rented during the period of the Olympics, I was starving, and there was a huge buffet spread, and I put the hat down, and I just went for the table and never even thought twice about that hat. And sort of, everywhere I go, people want to know where that white hat is, and I have no clue. It's in some landfill in LA County, I'm sure. I don't know if it was made out of synthetics or what, but it's probably still there in some matter. And but I was going through a lot of my archival materials and found a duplicate hat, so I have the same hat, but it's not the one I ran in.
Well, the lives of three of these folks intersected in Los Angeles. Jacqueline, it's her hometown. How cool is that? The first Olympic marathon, even though she wasn't in it.
Oh, by the way,
this was her
Jacqueline
town.
gave me a place to stay,
That's
too.
what I was going to say. Yeah.
Not in her house. She knew me well enough to know that she didn't want me in her space. But she had a friend, and I stayed in Cheryl's guest house. And I did stay one night in the Olympic Village, but the U.S. quarters were right next to the swimming pool. And the swimming swimming is the first sport, and the Americans were doing very well. So, every time I heard, the crowd get to its feet and applaud the efforts of our team, I'd have an adrenaline rush, and I thought, oh my gosh, I need to hang on to this adrenaline. So I actually went up to Eugene, back to familiar ground, for the week between the opening ceremonies, and flew down on Friday night, and the race was Sunday morning. And I almost missed the flight down from Eugene because there was a little wooden toy store at the airport, and my husband and I were getting married a month after the Olympics, and he had built me a wooden skiff, and there was a little wooden boat with 2 little heads in it, and I had to have that for the top of our wedding cake. So I almost missed the plane.
So Lorraine was in that same race, the first Olympic marathon for women. You must have wondered at about 3 miles, what in the world is she doing? When she took off and left everybody, just got this huge gap. But Lorraine, you came from a different background because you're a New Zealander by birth, and you track, obviously, even though Joan also came from track, and Jacqueline did as well. You were very much into track because competing internationally. So what led you to make that huge leap over many years, of course, from 800 meters to the marathon?
It's very hard to say. I think that the way that my life unfolded, it must have been destiny in some ways, because I certainly didn't plan it. When I was growing up, there was no such thing as professional athlete in the vocabulary of a young woman, and certainly not marathon runner or even, runner. All that was available was the sprints. And when I was about 13 and I went to high school, I qualified for our community sports, which we didn't have a school system. It was always done within each little town on a grass track. And they put me in a 400 meters, and I won the 400 meters and beat the girl who always beat me in the sprints. And I knew then that I was a distance runner. But the longest event was the 800 meters, so I went out for the 800 meters and was competing internationally by the time I was 16. But I was still not quick enough for the marathon, not for the marathon, for the Olympics. And the longest event at that time was the 1500 meters. So we were really shy of distance running for women. And also, there was not a sentiment that really supported women runners. Distance running was a sort of a maverick thing to do, and you were encroaching on a male territory. And I ran in canvas shoes, and I just wore whatever I could find. And there was no real motivation apart from just the love of doing it, and the small successes that I had, or they were rather. I won things, but I was in a very small pond. And anyway, I eventually came to the United States in 1979. I had been a school teacher because the only avenue open to sporting women then was to become a PE teacher. And so I became a PE teacher, but it was not my calling. I used to cry when I went to school. I don't want to go to school today. And they go, but you're the teacher. So anyway, it was one of those chance things. I was supposed to be engaged. Well, I was engaged. Not supposed to be engaged, but... But, I'd just sort of gone down this career track, and the next thing was to get married and marry a school teacher and, have a couple of kids and, give up my career while he went on teaching. And so I followed that whole path, and I got engaged to another teacher, and it wasn't right for me. And I came back to school, and I had this engagement ring on, and the first class was cricket. And the kids were... One kid was misbehaving. He was way out in the outfield. And you Americans, maybe I have to explain, but cricket has a ball that's like a rock. It's extremely hard. And so I said to the kids, well, you keep batting. And I went to sort this kid out, and I was standing there with my hands on my hips going, what do you think you're doing, young man? And somebody hit that cricket ball probably 100 feet, and it landed bang smack on my engagement ring and cracked the stone and bent the ring, and and I looked and I went, maybe this is a sign, So I broke off my engagement and gave the guy and gave him back his ring. And the weekend I was supposed to get married, I didn't know what to do with myself, so somebody said there's a marathon up in Auckland. And said that, Arthur Lydiard's got some, he was a very famous coach then, and they said so he's got some guys coming from America to run in this marathon, and there's a banquet afterwards, and he's looking for a date for one of the guys. I went, oh, good, okay, So I took her up there, and I went through the whole charade of, having to watch this marathon, which I thought was, pretty boring. And the marathon then, to me, was an event that was only for people who were too slow for the track. So, but I did want to get a look at this guy while he was running, and seeing somebody run a marathon for the first time is not particularly a good impression, but anyway. But anyway, when I met him at this banquet, and I thought, oh, what a handsome guy, and he was very accomplished, and he'd been to the Olympics, and he'd written a book, etc. And so I started this long-distance relationship, and he invited me to come and stay with him in Minneapolis. And so the next year I showed up and started running these races, and they were going to road races every weekend. So first weekend I ran my first 5K race, and then my first 10K race, and then I ran the Sidon to Mai in Madison, Stoughton to Madison, or the other way around, and that was fine, but I was used to doing these 20-mile runs to get ready for my track races, because that was the way we trained. So we always did an endurance space, and then on top of that we did our faster work. And so then the next few weekends later was the Grandma's Marathon, and they were all going up, and so I went along with them to Grandma's Marathon, and I said, okay, I'm going to run the first 20 miles and have somebody pick me up there, so I get my 20-mile run during this marathon. And so I started out, and I get to the 20-mile mark, and I feel pretty good, and I'm winning, and I thought, and my ride was waiting for me, and I thought, well, I might as well keep going, because I'll probably get a prize. So I kept running the race. I finished Grandma's Marathon, and I ran 2:37 for my first marathon, and and I got a prize. I got a plaque or something, and I thought everybody thought that was. I thought, Americans make a big fuss about nothing, And I went back to my track running, and then the next year I got invited to this Avon Women's World Championship in London, and so I went, and I thought, well, free trip to London, and all I have to do is do this long training run again. And then I wasn't sure if I could run another marathon, so 5 weeks beforehand I went back to Grandma's Marathon and ran through it again, just to make sure that I could go the distance. So I ran that, and then I went to the London Marathon, and I won that race. And then that really started to catapult things. And then they put the marathon in the Olympics, and a whole new world opened up. And I feel, really fortunate, because I've seen so many changes within my time from when I started to this time now, when, I'd go to those races. I ran the first marathon in Rio de Janeiro, so I got another free trip for a training run in 1980. And it was the first marathon that they had in South America. And there were 1,000 people that started, and 3 of them were women. It was me, a French woman, Raymonde Cornu, who was the French 100K champion, and I think she was probably the only woman that had run 100K, but and Sissel Grottenberg, who was a track runner who became a marathon runner. And so the 3 of us ran, and it was amazing. Today, Now we've got Napa Valley Marathon with 51% women. So, and, you know, and we've got these amazing women that have come before us, and they paved the way, you know. I mean, people talk about me being a pioneer, but, you know, I was not leading the charge. I was just, you know, right behind, and I can see that the changes have come because all they did was get out and do what they love to do. And that is probably the most powerful force for change there is.
Well, Lorraine, you, I mentioned before, competed in 4 Olympics in the marathon, first 4 in the Olympic marathon, but your best was in Barcelona, and you were 37 at the time. So you went from being an 800-meter runner of close to world class at 16 to a marathon medal at 37. Tell us about the race in Barcelona. I know that the man you mentioned coming to New Zealand, you came to Minnesota to be with him, but something happened in your things have already happened in your life together, which were apart by that time, but
I've had
the coincidence was maybe more than coincidence. The fact that
so I ended up marrying the guy and got divorced within a year. He was my coach, and I just don't marry your coach. It's not a good idea. And I left and came to Boulder, and because I had to get out of town. And so, you know, it was not a pretty breakup. But anyway, I never saw him again after I left, and I always thought I would. And I got on with my career, and eventually remarried and have my daughter. And so, you know, but it was an outstanding thing, an unfinished business. And 1992, you know, after all those things and things had opened up for when we had parity in events and all the rest, and here's my 3rd Olympics, and I really, you know, wanted to win my Olympic gold medal. That was my dream. And it was like my last chance, and suddenly this whole new thing seemed to arise where it was an age barrier now. And at 37, everybody considered I was so old, which was, you know, a really funny thing. And I think running has just been an amazing sport because we've got to rewrite all these cultural limitations, you know, and you know, 37 is not old, not from where I'm 20 years later, where I sit. But people didn't give me a chance. And so I went to that race, and I was really an underdog. And 3 things happened to me, which were all significant. The first one was that I couldn't get, my shoe company dropped me, and I had been with this company for quite a few years, and Olympic year, they didn't want to renew any sponsorship, so I had no funds. And because they considered I was too old. They wanted to put their marketing dollars into somebody who was up and coming, and they went, you know, I was past my day, and whatever I'd done, that was it, and I had no potential left. And so that was a really significant thing, but you know what, it was such a freedom to not have the obligation of wearing a pair of shoes just because somebody was paying you. And so don't necessarily buy a pair of shoes just because somebody famous wears them. And I went out and I bought myself a pair of shoes. The first time I'd bought a pair of shoes, and I bought the pair of shoes that I really liked. You know, they felt good, and so that was something really new. The second thing was that I had an arch rival from New Zealand, Anne Ordain, who was just an excellent runner, but you know how you always have that person who you just hate to have them beat you, you know? And she was that person for me, and our rivalry started from when I was 14 years old. And So we were always sort of competing for, the first New Zealander. And right through the 84 Olympics, the 88 Olympics, and then 1992, she retired. And I went, how can I go to the Olympics without Anne? But it was another release, and I suddenly realized I had so much attention always focused on beating Anne that I wasn't focused on the race as a whole. So that was another thing that was changed. And then the third thing that happened was the day before the race, I was in the dining room and Janice Klecker from Minnesota came over and she told me that Ron had died, and Ron had been my ex-husband. And so that was the third thing that left my life, and that right before the day was a tremendous shock. And my team had tried to keep the news from me, but it's amazing how word gets out. And so I had to deal with that whole thing, and they thought it would be too shocking and I wouldn't be able to run, or it would upset me too much, etc. And the night before I went out and I sat by myself, and I decided that the best thing I could do in this situation was run the way that, because he taught me so much about good marathoning, and to use that and run the best possible race that I could. And I ended up winning the bronze medal in that race. So, life is very much about guaranteed as change, and it's about reinventing yourself. I remember Peter Snell, the great New Zealand runner who'd won 3 gold medals in the 60s, and when he retired, and he was only 30 or something like that, and he says, life is a process of continually reinventing yourself. And it very much is for runners. I retired when I was 41 at my last Olympics, and it's like, then what do you do? Because we have to expand those ideas of what you are and upgrade our programs just like we do with our computers, wipe away all the old programs and upgrade them into something new and expanded, because your world should be getting bigger, and I think the race teaches you that. You go in the race and you practice physically getting mastership over being able to make your dreams come true, and to expand your idea of who you think you are, and you meet that in the race. You get that crunch time and you go, okay, am I going to give it up here, or I'm going to, stick with the program and push through and achieve what I wanted to achieve. And so it's I think probably a really underrated, or perhaps not spoken about enough, the transformative qualities of getting in and being competitive and pushing against yourself, and against having a good rival like I had Anne O'Dane, just to keep upping the ante. And you go, and nearly all these women have said, I figured if somebody else could do it, then I could do it. And so we're all examples to one another, and it's just wonderful. I am very, very grateful to have been a part of it, and to be sitting here in this room with all of you. I really appreciate it. So, thank you.
Well, all of these women are great examples of life after the last PR, because all of them have been involved in some way or another with continuing to promote the sport and to make the sport better. Lorraine, why don't you tell us first? I'm going to go down the table, and you tell us first what you are doing now in running.
I'm currently the president of the Lydiard Foundation. So it's a non-profit, and it is dedicated to promoting the coaching methods of Arthur Lydiard. And I also speaking and writing, and mother to a 12-year-old sitting over there who likes to run with me. And so,
And Arthur Lydiard, for those who don't know, revolutionized running about 50 years ago by bringing long-distance training all the way down to 800-meter runners. I think that was one of the X factors in Lorraine's life, why she made the transition so easily to the marathon. Not easily, that's never a word you want to use with the marathon. But the fact that you had run long, you were running 20-mile runs as an 800-meter runner.
Yes, and I think also it contributed a lot to my longevity as a runner. So I could compete over a huge range, and I continued to run track and marathons consecutively, and continued to improve for a long, long time. And I hardly ever got injured, which was wonderful, and it was over about a 30-year period.
And good luck to you, and thank you for continuing the legacy of Arthur Lydiard. It needs to be done.
Thank
Every
you,
new
Joe.
generation of runners needs to be introduced to Arthur Lydiard, who passed away in his late 80s about 10 years ago.
2004.
Yeah. Nina, you've touched on it briefly, but you've had a longer time after your last PR, but you've also had more time to do a lot of good work. And so anything we didn't mention earlier about your involvement in the sport?
Well, yeah, I was thinking, I didn't mention that one day I decided to run the 50-mile run. 1977, so I was 38 years old, and I broke the American record. It went very well. I really wasn't planning to run it. I was planning to help out Dr. John Pagliano from California, and then 2 days before I found out he wasn't coming, so I thought, well, I'll run it. And it was in Central Park. I knew the course, and it was wonderful. It was wonderful, except that my heart rate didn't go down. A couple hours later, I tried to take a nap, but my heart rate was still like 76, and it took quite a few hours for my heart rate to go back down again. But I'm still. When Joni in the Olympic trials, that was like the highlight, I think, of my administrative career with USA Track and Field, because I was the chairman of the women's long distance running. And to see Joni and Julie McKinney, who's sitting in the back, was on the committee and helpful too. And when Joni came in 17 days after the arthroscopic surgery, and watching her through the trials, and then we were sitting near the finish line when we saw her crossing. She had 800 meters to go. You're on the other side of the lake. Oh my gosh! Oh, it was just fantastic. It was like a dream come true. We were fulfilled, and now we were going to be in the first Olympics, and we had Joni in there. So I think those were some things I really wanted to say. Thank you.
Jacqueline. Jacqueline?
Follow up on that, I want to thank Joan. You said my Olympics were running Olympia, and indeed they were. But when Joni stayed with me during 1984 Olympic Games and thanked me for making it possible, that was really my Olympic medal right there. If I couldn't earn or try to go for an Olympic medal, at least I got to hold one. And I only put her at Cheryl's house because I lived in an apartment. It was small, so she had her own space in the guest house. But we went on runs together, and especially the day after, I thought I could keep up with her.
Yeah.
No. I thought finally she'll come down to my level, but no, we burned through like at least 12 miles to Venice and back, and fast anyway. But thank you for saying thank you. It made it all worthwhile. I after being president of the IRC, which I am writing about in the book. I work at Loyola Marymount University. One of my colleagues, Stephanie Cerventi, is here to support me today, and I really appreciate that. All this running stuff is my other life, but at LMU, most of them don't even know I was a runner. I teach teachers health education, and I work in the School of Education, in the administrative part with Stephanie, but I also still teach teachers how to teach kids about health and fitness. And I used to work for the LA84 Foundation. I do continue to do coaching workshops for them. So I coach coaches how to coach kids, and I teach teachers how to teach kids. And to keep my hand in it, I coach high school cross country, primarily girls, but I coach high school cross country too. Got my Notre Dame high school team sent our girls team to the state meet this year for the first time in school history, so I'm real proud of those girls and that team. What else do? I'm writing a book. Joe gives me homework every night, and I look forward to it because it's the fun part. And walking down memory lane, and I'm going to Boston to celebrate my 40th. Going to do a distance running camp in Culver, Indiana in June. Going to Jan Seeley's Illinois Marathon in April after Boston. I'm keeping busy. Resting on my laurels and living vicariously through my runners, 3 of whom who qualified for Boston. 3 of whom who qualified for Boston purposefully to come help me celebrate. So I was literally online coaching all morning until I had to sign off and say, I gotta go do this speaking engagement. So
Well, you weren't doing it up here anyway.
I wasn't texting up here. I had to turn the phone off because they couldn't stop texting about their long run this morning.
Yeah. I know Joan keeps busy, and maybe she hasn't run her last Olympic trials yet. I don't know, but Joan, many things, but I think one of the primary ones is your race in Maine.
Well, first I'd like to echo what Lorraine said. Everybody thinks I'm a pioneer, but I'm not the pioneer. These 2 women in the middle are the real pioneers. So when I had that opportunity, thanks to Nina and Jacqueline, to run in the first Olympics, I approached the tunnel, and I really didn't think anybody was going to be in there, because I said, who's going to come out and watch a bunch of women run 26.2 miles on a Sunday morning? And I literally heard the crowd get to its feet before I saw the crowd. But as I entered the tunnel, I said, are you capable of going into that tunnel and coming out into the light on the other side and dealing with what might happen as a result of staying on my feet and crossing that finish line first? And I said, if I have that honor, I'm going to make sure I give back to a sport and to a community that have given so much to me. So I've tried to live by that. Hence, I founded the Beach to Beacon 10K in Maine, in my hometown. It is celebrating its 16th year this year. We benefit a different children's charity every year. Our motto is Shine the Light for Kids, because it finishes at Portland Headlight, which was the first lighthouse commissioned by George Washington. Registration opens up March 15th. We fill in 8 minutes. And we do go to a lottery system for some of the places right after that. So if you run in different states to fill in your designated marathon per state, put that one on your list. Just don't come to me if you don't get in, because the race organization keeps tight reins on me as far as letting people in. So that was one way I gave back to the state. And I said the 2008 Olympic trials was going to be my last competitive marathon. And I had a goal of running a sub 250 at the age of 50, and I just made that goal. So I had ended a story where I had started a story with Boston in 1979, and so I walked away feeling fulfilled. Then the following year, Mary Wittenberg called me from New York and said, how would you like to come to New York to celebrate the 25th anniversary of your Olympic win and the 40th anniversary of our marathon? And I thought, well, sure. And then I said yes, and the press called, and they said, we thought you'd run your last competitive marathon. And I said, yes, but I never said what constitutes competitive. So the next year, Carrie Pinkowski called me and said, Joan, it's the 25th anniversary of your fastest marathon ever. How would you like to come back to Chicago? And I said, sure. And not only that, the date was 10-10-10, and how could you pass up those numbers? Yeah. So all of a sudden, I said to myself, you seem to be telling stories with your running. So I was looking at last year, and I thought, the Olympic year, London. I've never run the London Marathon. I'll go to London. And about a week or two before London, I was asked by the American Red Cross to come and speak to their group of runners who had been given beneficiary status for the first time in the Boston Marathon. And they had overseen the aid stations for, I think, 38 years, and this was the first time they were receiving beneficiary status. And my mother had served in the Red Cross during World War II in India and China, so I thought, I'll go down and speak. And Tom Grilk introduced me, who's the president of the BAA, and he said, in this 40th year of woman at Boston, and I knew our daughter was registered to run, and I said, 40 years of woman at Boston, 40 years of Title IX, my daughter's running, why the heck am I going to London? I'm running Boston. So that was the first time I had the opportunity to run stride for stride with my daughter, who's running here tomorrow. So that really was the biggest marathon of my life. It was really, really special. It was really hot. I don't know if anybody in this crowd ran in Boston last year, but it was a scorcher. And so I promised myself I would never, I would stop competitive running when I couldn't break 45 minutes in a 10K or couldn't run within an hour of the men's world record in the marathon. So I still have some time. The next story out there possibly is celebrating my 30th anniversary in Boston this April, along with Greg Meyer. So a nice story would be to try to run within 30 minutes of that time 30 years later, which means I'd need to run a 2:52 or better, which is quite a challenge. So we'll see what happens. But to me, running now, I like to use running as a platform to build awareness for both health and the environment, because I believe prevention is to health what conservation is to the environment. And there's no other person who understands that than, you know, a runner, because we're out there breathing that air every single day. And as I said, I'm just back from China, and I'll tell you, I couldn't wait to get out of the quality over there. There's an app they use over there, and you can download it if you please. It's called China Air, and the icon has a couple of beady eyes and a mask over the nose and mouth. And it literally monitors the different air qualities around the cities in China. And I met with a friend over there who oversees the footwear in China and for Nike, and he said that his whole mission in China is to increase the running population so that they will demand cleaner air standards. He thinks that's the only way that it's going to happen. But, you know, we have our own issues over here, and environmental air quality is very important, and as runners we see these changes and feel these changes. And so the same thing is true to our health status. I mean, the only way we're going to have a healthier population in the States is to add some more preventative measures, and running is accessible and it's affordable. So I think that's why you see our sport enjoying the growth that it is these years.
Well, nothing I can say in conclusion will top what these women have already said, but we thank them very much for honoring us by being here and for being here for so long for the sport. And you all are the beneficiaries of what they have done. So thank you very much.
Good job, ladies.
Where's mine?